So the first bit of business is I have your schedules for this quarter. Go. And Eli, I will get that to you in a minute. All right, so probably the most important thing that you need to know on here is that your secondary novel that you're reading, Their Eyes Were Watching God, The Things They Carried, or Of Mice and Men, you're going to need to have that read by February 3rd. So you've got a couple weeks still. There will be a little written response with that will be argumentative, but that you will use evidence from the text to back up your argument. That will be published by Friday, so you can see what that assignment is. But we'll have lit circles with your group, so you're not only letting me down and deeply disappointing me if you don't read it, but you'll be deeply disappointing your groups. And you know, there will be all sorts of social pressure about what a loser you are for not reading the books. So that's that's due on February 3rd. Until then, we're kind of working through Gatsby. We are looking at some other supplementary sources. I don't know if we'll get to the Nixon and Studs Terkel stuff today, but we might next time. We've got some stuff about economics coming up. We get to read about Bernie and so on. Then we start to talk about synthesis essays, and we're kind of combining them. We're still writing argument essays, but we're thinking about when we have sources available to us, how we incorporate those sources. So that's kind of coming up, and we start talking about language as a little mini unit to do a synthesis essay with. So everything's pretty straightforward. You'll be writing these Gatsby responses. There's some multiple choice practice. There's a few days in here with just multiple choice practice for homework, which is kind of nice because that takes 12 minutes, and then if you want to do the test corrections, they're not too bad. But interspersed, you'll see there's argument essay 1 on January 27th, argument essay 2, argument essay 3. You're going to be using prompts from the test to write those. So just like we did with rhetorical analysis, these are short, kind of repetitive assignments to get you fast at writing arguments. That's the purpose of them. And that's why we do a bunch of them instead of just one longer one. All right, so there's a schedule. Does anyone have any questions about that, just looking over it? Hey, awesome. All right, the other thing is that ACT is coming up, isn't it?
Oh.
My English is the worst out of all.
Well, let's fix that.
Actually, my English is like that. So my first one.
Well, I can't help you with math,
My English is actually my best.
but I can help you with the other 3. And the reason I can help you with science too is because I don't know if you know, the science is just a reading test. Yeah.
I did so.
If you know how to read graphs and you know how to read like kind of more convoluted nonfiction, convoluted is a negative word, I don't know, complex nonfiction, then you can do well on science. And when I realized that about the science test, science went from being my lowest to my highest score. It really does make a difference to just see it as a reader. Not good?
I'm blaming.
That's the other thing is when you take it a second time, you know what to expect about that test. It feels a lot better.
I never wanted to look at the ACT ever.
Okay, so if you're a senior, this is just, extra grammar practice, amazing. Maybe you want to retake the ACT, so it would be practice for that. But if you are a junior, this test is coming up, and this test is important. Kind of luckily, this test is becoming less important, especially with COVID. Colleges are starting to realize that maybe they shouldn't base so much on your performance on one standardized test. Yeah, when it's not a super equitable test, and yeah.
And the guy that created it told says that it was unethical.
That's always fun. But in the meantime, scholarships and stuff and admittance to lots of schools really depends on how you do on this test, right? So I am going to focus, we have already, with these multiple choice practices that you've already done practices that are much harder than the questions on the ACT. And the reading portion of the ACT has a whole lot to do with comprehension. Usually if you've taken AP Lang, you do pretty well on the reading portion of the test. The grammar portion, on the other hand, though, the English portion, we have not at all in this class gone through grammar rules. So for the next, up until the test, I'm going to fit in grammar at the beginning of the class as much as I can. And we'll do some days where it's just a few practice things and it takes a couple of minutes. And then some days where it takes a little bit longer because like today I'm going to give you the rules. And I think knowing the official rules for all of this grammar makes a world of difference where you're not just trying to like feel it out like, oh, it feels like a comma should go here. When you actually know why a comma goes with a dependent clause at the beginning or whatever, I think it's gonna help. So let's go through capitalization first. This is probably the most simple of the rules, but it's also maybe the more difficult ones to remember because there are so many rules. And they sometimes seem a little bit arbitrary. But as I'm talking, we're gonna have 8 do rules and 7 do not capitalize rules. So the first one is obvious, the first word in a sentence. I have not seen anyone mess that one up, thank goodness. Okay, number 2 is names and proper nouns, including nicknames. Yeah, I have seen people mess this one up, especially with I. We capitalize the personal pronoun I, right? Because it's standing in for a proper noun. I know you know that. I know that it's just that Google Docs doesn't always correct that, and sometimes people are lazy. So, but let's just get that up. Yeah. Look, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. All right, number 3 are the names of days, months, and holidays. We capitalize those. Number 4, we capitalize places, including like places like road names or street names. Yeah. So I'll put it like this, because that's not that important. Including roads, so I live on Rambler Drive. I shouldn't have said that.
Wow, that's like
And my house. So I would capitalize Rambler, but I would also capitalize Drive. You capitalize the name of the full street, right? The name of the full place. Okay, number 5 is you capitalize brand names, companies, and organizations. There are a few brand names that have become so entrenched with their product that you actually have a choice. So something like Kleenex, you're supposed to capitalize Kleenex and Band-Aid officially because that is the brand name, but because it has also become the noun that talks about that thing, like an adhesive strip that sticks to your skin, it's called a Band-Aid now, right? So you kind of have some choice in that. But for the most part, if it's a company name, we capitalize that one. All right, number 6, titles. Now this one I see messed up quite a lot. In MLA, we capitalize the first word and last word always, no matter what it is. So even if it's the letter A, A Tale of Two Cities, we still capitalize that first word, last word, and any other words that are more than, okay, let me put it like this. It's hard to explain. First word and last word always, and any other words that are important except prepositions and fanboys, which are like those coordinating conjunctions that are under 5 letters. Stupid rule. Why can't we just capitalize every word in the title? How difficult would that be? But they do want to make it difficult for us. So any like short prepositions or articles or coordinating conjunctions, we don't have to capitalize those, but everything else in the title needs to be capitalized. So The Great Gatsby, every word of that is capitalized. The things they carried, everything is capitalized in that. Of mice and men, which word would not be capitalized? And, yeah, okay. And that's an MLA rule. The ACT will not talk to you about that, or not ask you about that, but I'm a completist here. All right, number 7 is race and nationality. I'm seeing a lot of people write about the American dream without capitalizing America. Any nationality, any reference to place like that needs to be capitalized. If you are a Utahn, you would capitalize the U in Utah, right? If you're Canadian, you capitalize the C. Okay, number 8 is special occasions. Kind of a catch-all kind of special occasions and events and historical movements. So I saw when we were writing a lot about the civil rights era, we didn't really talk, about this explicitly, so I didn't like count it against you, but you should capitalize civil rights movement or civil rights era, because it's like a special event in history. Okay, any repetition on that? Anybody need me to repeat anything? Okay, cool, let's do the don't capitalizes then. Do not capitalize seasons. Even if you're getting fancy and calling it autumn instead of fall and you don't capitalize it. Don't capitalize, well, then you capitalize it. Don't capitalize directions. Now, this is tricky. There's a bit of a trickiness here where it's you capitalize places, but you don't capitalize directions. So if I am going west on I-80, I would not capitalize west. However, if I am going to the west to visit Yosemite Park, I would capitalize west because I'm calling it a place. It's the west, right? The south, I'd capitalize it. I wouldn't capitalize I just capitalize south if I'm talking about it as a place. But if I'm going in a certain direction, don't capitalize it. All right, number 3, you do capitalize races, but black and white is not a race. It's a descriptor. You capitalize African American, you don't capitalize black. That feels like an arbitrary rule to me too, but I think grammar's slower to evolve than other things. Okay, don't capitalize the name of foods unless it's named after a person. So lasagna, you don't capitalize it, but if you have some recipe called Grandma Swain's lasagna, then you can capitalize Grandma Swain. You still don't capitalize lasagna. Okay. Number 5. Oh, and that is also true of foods like Granny Smith apples. You capitalize Granny Smith, but you don't capitalize apples or any kind of food that's named after something, either because it's a brand name or because it's a proper noun somehow. You'd capitalize the proper noun always. All right, you don't capitalize medical conditions. So you don't capitalize diabetes or cancer. Again, the only time you do this is when it's named after a person. So you do capitalize Parkinson in Parkinson's disease because that was named after a guy named Parkinson. Or you capitalize Lou Gehrig, but you don't capitalize the disease because you're just capitalizing the proper noun there. Number 6 is that title thing. So in titles, you don't capitalize any of the fanboy words or short prepositions and articles. When I say fanboys, do you guys know what I mean by that? Okay, some people don't. So this is an acronym that a lot of times in elementary school or middle school teachers will use it to introduce you to what's called coordinating conjunctions. conjunction, junction, what's your function? Putting two sentences together, right? These are all the coordinating conjunctions. So it's for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Do you want me to put it again? We'll talk about this when we talk more about commas, but for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Those are all the coordinating conjunctions. Okay, last thing, you do not capitalize species names. So if you have a pug, you don't capitalize the word pug. Labradoodle, don't capitalize it. The only time you do is when it's named after a place or a person. So you would capitalize German in German Shepherd, but not Shepherd, just the proper noun version. All right, anything you want me to repeat? I know those came fast and furious. When in doubt, Google it. ACT will not ask you about this stuff except for maybe this one, days, months, holidays, names, and first word in the sentence, first letter in the sentence. Other than that, this is kind of like extra, but you'll be experts on, actually, no, they'll ask you about these too. But you'll be experts on capitalization, so, you know, that's something to brag about. All right, so what I want you to do, don't worry about the red pen, black pen. I do this with 10th graders, just do it with a regular pen. I just want you to correct sentences 1 through 5. The way that you correct capitalization is words that should be capitalized, you put 3 lines underneath it, and words that should not be capitalized, you put a dash through it. Okay, give it a shot, see how you do. Okay, I'm just gonna, this is one of the few times I do this, but I'm just gonna randomly call on people and you're gonna tell me which words we need to capitalize in the sentence, okay? All right, so I'll start with Kate. Which words do we need to capitalize in sentence 1?
We, not all,
Mm-hmm.
natural history,
Perfect,
Salt Lake City.
perfect. So you don't capitalize of, but you capitalize Utah Museum Natural History. All right, let's do number 2. Mallory, will you do number 2?
So usually I, and then
Okay, awesome. How about this one that says, but when mom puts it in her recipe? Do we capitalize mom there? Yeah, so why, let's think of the rules. Why would we, because we do, why do we capitalize it? Yeah.
And it's a label or a title.
Yes, yes, but if we don't have to think about titles and labels and all of that, we're thinking of it as a proper noun, including nicknames, right? So my mom's name is Lynette, but I call her mom as a kind of nickname. So when you're using it as a nickname, as their proper name, you use it that way. You would capitalize it. Okay, let's look at number 3. Ben, will you do 3?
Yeah. I, Marty, Heather, German, and me.
Yeah, I wish she did have a dog named Meatball. I just invented that part. The rest is true. Everyone hear that? Anyone have questions on that one? Okay, awesome. Tiana, will you do number 4? Okay, so it's L for last summer, right?
Yeah.
And then what was the other one? Uh-huh. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so why don't we capitalize dad in that one? Yeah, Nathan.
Because they're saying my dad and not referring to it as a person.
Yeah, so it's not standing in as a nickname. It's like I'm talking about his role in the family. This is true also if we're talking about presidents. So if you say President Biden, then you would do, just like I switched, right? If you do President Biden and you refer to him that way, you're like, President Biden gave an inaugural address today. You would capitalize the P. But if you said President Biden is the president of the United States, you wouldn't if you just said Biden is the president of the United States, you wouldn't capitalize the P. So it works that way where you're using a word to stand in for their name. Here, I'm not using it to stand in for his name. I'm just referring to him. Okay, number 5. Cooper, will you do number 5?
Yeah, I did my January Huntsman Institute.
Yes.
Yes.
In Huntsman Institute, the whole name is Huntsman Cancer Institute. So we would capitalize all 3 of those. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on these? Pretty basic. Awesome. Let's move on then. I really like talking about grammar in this class because it feels like it's the only thing that's like secure. There are right and wrong answers. Everything else is so subjective in English classes, but grammar, we've got rules. It's nice. All right, let's go back to the subjective though. You're going to talk about some hard work and what our values around hard work are. So let me plug in so you can see. Save that capitalization sheet. We're going to do the next part next time. Okay, Eli, I'm just going to put these prompts in the chat box for you. And I want you to write your responses to them. They can be short. We're going to spend about 5 minutes on this. How we value hard work in our country. And I just want you to discuss these with the people around you. But does the kind of hard work, or does the kind of work or labor matter in the way we value it? And again, we're thinking about in America. Do we value the plumber as much as the computer IT guy, as much as the NASA engineer, right? Do we believe that working hard in America is a way to achieve self-confidence? Like the harder you work, the better you can feel about yourself. Do you believe that competitive spirit is always a virtue? It's always a good thing to be competitive. Can you think of an alternative to a dominating work ethic that could be more valuable to an individual or a society? So it's just true that in America we talk a lot about hard work equaling success. So do you think that there could be a different virtue that could be more valuable to us, or do you think that's the one? And then what kind of problems might arise from celebrating the competitive spirit of America? This is kind of like, it goes with question 3, which is like the cons of that kind of competitive spirit in a society.
All right, I'm gonna give you, we're just introducing these ideas now. So I'm gonna give you about 5 minutes or so to talk about these in your group. Try and think, as you're doing this, try and think of examples to back up your point. So when you're like, no, we don't value, the NASA engineer as much as the teacher or whatever, I don't know. I want you to think of examples of this, either in your life or in your reading that can help prove your point. Okay? Yeah, and just talk to the people around you. Okay, go for it. Yeah, we're.
No, we don't value the hard life. We don't value the same moment, but we
Sorry, Eli, I was up front explaining this, but I think you heard before I went up, just type some answers to those questions. If you don't get through them all in 5 minutes, that's fine. I just want you thinking about them.
Right, I think it is. Yeah, I think
Yes. I think very right forward. We always had to up there and kick our butt and make them feel like we were forward. Right now, we're big. Troy, I do little plans of it. That's a million years ago. But no, we will overcome them. That's not going to sometimes you eat a fire to become more.
Like makes a lot of conscious. Every single riot and stuff, no matter which side it's been, it has been due to some sort of conflict. Whether it's the election, college space, it's still a sort of conflict. They disagree with that is and like all of that stuff. I think it's like mainly because of my spirit and because like the election, I'm sure it may invite change, but if there was a conflict, there would be change. Yeah.
Rick, are you-
I was on 1 AM.
I know. I
I don't even know what I was doing. No, he is. I was on 1 AM last night, but I don't remember what I was doing. You're just staring up at the ceiling in your bedroom, but she's kind.
You'd still be under that control.
Okay, let's have about a 5-minute discussion together on this topic before we actually look how it plays out in Gatsby. So let's just start with that first part. You know, in America, and we're going to read some text about this, we do tend to lionize hard work, like almost like just think it is the most respectable thing that you can do, right? Is working hard. Like there are, I don't know if you guys got to this question, but there are all sorts of other things that we could value. We could value our leisure time. We could value family connections. And I'm not saying that we don't value those things, but we put hard work in our rhetoric above a lot in terms of what can lead you to success, right? So do you think then that we value work equally, Cooper? Or maybe that we should too.
So the perspective that I got is that we value the hard work. So we look at people who went out and did all the hard work and we think, yes, that's amazing. We should all do that. But then we all kind of just give up and go home and sit on Netflix.
Okay, so it's about our personal commitment to the idea. It's like in our rhetoric, in our conversations, we're like, that is amazing. I think that's so amazing that you did that. But like, that's a difficult ideal to live up to
Like saying,
at all times.
It's like watching McDonald's documentaries and then continuing to order a Big Mac after.
Oh, you're talking about like Super Size Me?
Yeah, that. But
Yeah.
Like any of the McDonald's
Yeah.
documentaries that we all think, oh, that's disgusting.
Oh, yeah.
And we immediately go and get a Big Mac within a week.
I remember doing that. I remember seeing Super Size Me in the theaters and then being like, man, I need a Big Mac. And I hadn't eaten a Big Mac in years. So I was just like, this had the opposite effect. Or have you seen the Jamie Oliver thing where he shows the little kids what goes into chicken nuggets?
Oh.
And then they're all just like, give me the nuggets. Like they just want chicken nuggets afterwards. Yeah, okay.
But you still do.
Okay, so it's like, yeah, it's a value. Whether or not we all live up to it, maybe is what's at stake. Yeah. Ben, what were you gonna say?
I think without all the different jobs and stuff that we had, we begin to value them. Like all the garbage collectors all went on strike, we begin to value them more because we realize what happened.
Okay, so there seems to be then some kind of invisible labor out there that we don't think about until it becomes a problem for us. That's a lot of different kinds of labor, isn't it? Where, you know, we know hypothetically that someone's out there doing it, and it's not like we don't want them to do it, but they're not at the forefront of our thoughts until they're not picking up trash or, yeah. They're not something that we aspire to be quite often, right? Does anyone aspire to be, like, for example, a custodian? Like, as a kid, do I want to be a custodian? No, it's something that you kind of fall into, you realize you like, because you realize you can make good money, right? But it's not something that we, like, talk about all together and say, these days we do with custodians, but usually, you know, we don't talk together about how are you going to fulfill your dreams of being the garbage man, right? The garbage man. What do we call them? Waste management. Waste management. There we go. Okay. What other thoughts do you have on this idea of whether we value hard work in our country? What about that question that? Oh yeah, Isaac.
Well, I was gonna say no, we don't value the same, and I don't think we should.
Okay.
Except for the Ben's comment. Like, I didn't really think about that. Because I was like, well, if you don't have like as much of an education for it, it doesn't take hard work, then we shouldn't value it as much as something who like went to like 8 years of college for or whatever, like something like that.
Okay, so there's probably a divide then in the way that we value intellectual labor versus physical labor. And a lot of times the jobs that are more physically taxing, but maybe we call hard work more openly, are the jobs that we don't value as much as the jobs that you had to do a lot of intellectual labor to prepare yourself for it. And that's the other thing, is that we don't value the jobs that take a lot of training, or we value those more. Sorry, I have someone trying to hack my account. Yeah. They're called the gang lols. And that's not one of us, right? I don't think, unless it's Emmeline, which I can't see. Okay, anyway, yeah, Nathan.
I feel like the way to kind of like change that divide is, there's a difference between value and respect.
Okay.
So I feel like in order to stop that, the garbage and the waste management from going on strike, we can still respect them with still valuing things that take more intellectual work than that,
Ah, interesting. So valuing in this case then is almost like how much they're compensated for it, or like what kind of compensation they get, whereas respect is like, I acknowledge you.
Yeah.
I acknowledge your contribution. Okay, yeah.
I think that we say that hard work is more important, but I honestly think that favoritism plays more of a role in it than anything. Like,
Okay.
the thought that came to my head was teaching is a female-dominated field, but most principals are men. Like, what's up with that?
Yeah, ain't that the truth? So there seems to be ways that we value things based on gender, based on race a lot of times.
Yeah.
It's the same as like, well, maybe not the same, but we do tend to undervalue nurses and maybe I would argue overvalue doctors. Maybe for those same reasons. Now I'm getting on a soapbox, but yeah, so there's some luck then and favoritism that goes into which professions get more of our value or respect, however we're thinking about that idea. Okay, how about this question about competition then? This is the last thing we'll talk about. Is competition a competitive spirit, which is like more than just saying like we're gonna be cutthroat and dog eat dog, a competitive spirit. Is that always a good thing in a culture, or are there some downsides to it, or yeah, Adrian?
All right, so we didn't get to the rest of the questions because me and Ben had a long talk about this one.
Oh, okay.
So I feel like competitive, like it, and I want to make this clear because I didn't make it clear to you. It is at some point, yes, it is good. There is some times where it is good, but I think a lot of times it is bad because, Ben's argument was it's what drives us forward, and I kind of feel like sometimes it drives us forward into each other, So I feel like at some points it's good. It's done some good things before, but I feel like if there wasn't any competitive spirit in the beginning, we wouldn't have to change things. Like, I'm not going to go on a 10-minute rant.
But if there was more of a spirit of cooperation among people, then we wouldn't have to progress forward, is kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Interesting. I am reading a book about the influenza pandemic of 1918, and they're talking about how doctors became respected. So this reminded me of Christiane's comment too. And one of the big things so at first doctors were not that respected because they went to a couple years of school, they didn't have any hands-on practice. There's a whole series of reasons, but one of the ways that they became respected is that they decided to limit access to medical school. So not everybody could go to medical school, and by increasing that competitive spirit, you got better doctors, right? It progressed medicine forward, but it sure left a lot of people behind, including people who would have been marginalized in the first place too, right? So that people who wanted access now can't have access. All right, Christiane.
I do think that some competition is good, but there is a point where there's too much competition, and then everyone's just tearing each other down to the point where we're going backwards.
Okay, do you have an example that would work for this?
I don't think so.
What can we think of for that? Because I think we could think of examples for this. Cooper?
So have you watched the last election?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's sort of what I was thinking. All right, so how does it work this way? This competitive spirit is getting in the way and we're going backwards. Good, explain like what you mean by the example. Yeah.
So in the last election, you look at it from the riots and all that stuff that's happened because of that. It was all incited because, we need to go out and do this. We need to be raw. We need to go out and all that fun stuff. That was really jumbled up and made absolutely no sense.
So part of it is, didn't the riots remind you of when like the Eagles lose and Philadelphia goes crazy? Like, Yeah, it becomes like a competition based not just on your values, but a competition for competition's sake. And maybe that's where you take the backward step, where it just becomes about winning. That's not to say that everyone who stormed the Capitol doesn't have like, I feel like it's not just competition for competition's sake. There's something more insidious underneath that. Like insidious means evil. Like there's something deeper there. But you do see kind of people getting wrapped up in it, like caught up in it, I mean. Tate, and then to Ben.
I think another, like, in most cases, competitive spirit is good, but like, when it comes to like as a society or as the government, I think they can be bad, because they can lead to like unnecessary, like, people going too far. Like, I guess a space race from 5 years example, I think the Soviet Union and the US when they worked together, they were gonna do it a lot faster and spend a lot less money.
Interesting. But because they saw each other as competitors, as enemies, competitors, then they couldn't actually collaborate. It seems like that's the case for like a lot of global politics, you know? If we could just collaborate on, you know, world health issues a little bit better, I think we'd have some more success with different pandemics. Maybe not this one, but, you know, Ebola is an example of that one.
You can
Yeah.
also see that that they provide that they cause.
Yeah, that nothing really gets done because of it.
Because
Yeah.
one party will suggest something, the other party will go against it.
Even if it's something that one party already agreed with. Yeah, you totally see that. Ben, and then Tanika.
I think that competition does drive us forward more than cooperation does. And there's like examples, like all the world wars drove us forward,
Yeah.
technology-wise, they drove us forward. And use something like the International Space Station, which was collaboration to make that, but that would not have happened without the space race happening, with the war or the like space competition.
Interesting.
So you kind of need that competition to have cooperation, because then you figure out who your enemies are to collaborate with them later on.
Got it.
Otherwise, you can't really collaborate with them later on because you don't even know anything about them or what they have to offer.
This is so interesting that the way that you can get ahead is by designating certain people enemies. Because that's how war kind of works, right? This person is against my values, and so I have to work extra hard to establish my values, and then this can push me forward. And you see that in the workplace a lot of times too. If you have somebody in the workplace that is like your enemy, do you guys have this at your jobs? You guys are all kind of like chill at work, right? But if you have somebody who's your enemy at your job, you want to establish like my values are different than theirs. That's going to kind of push you to a new place as a worker too. Nathan.
I was just say some notes, but you know, I did want to say that that is why I think in some cases, yes, it is good. And honestly, I can see how sometimes it could be better than cooperation. I just wanted to say that. And
yeah, but it's nuanced, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is just with what Tate said. I remember I talked to you about this when I came in for lunch one time. When I was saying, like, when it comes to presidential stuff and like elections and all that, this is why I think that in some cases it's really bad that we do have political parties in the first place, because like Kate said, say like, just for sake of argument, say I'm a Democrat and for some reason the Republican candidate has more values that fit my values than the Democratic one is. I'm probably still going to vote Democratic, because, you know, that's my side. I want my side to win, and I don't even care what each side does. You know, if it's my side, then it fits my values, and that's what I want to win. Yeah. So I feel like in cases like that, that's another example of when it's not a good thing, and it just takes us backwards.
Competition seems to set up this false idea that there are only two sides to something a lot of times, right? And so you start to erase nuance, and you start to not think of things in complicated ways. You just want to stick with your side. Okay, I have a recommendation for you guys. It's Mallory. There's a documentary that just came out called Boys State. Has anyone seen this? So there's a program down in Texas that gets all of these young high school boys, like, well, actually, no, I think they were all through high school. I think they went up to seniors, but they're kids, right? Like your age. They get them all together. And it's a program you have to apply to. So these are kind of like top students. And they basically play government for a weekend,
where they have to decide they randomly get assigned to parties, and then they have to decide what their party platform is. They have to elect people at local levels and then high up, and they just play government. And you see this idea played out in that documentary. There's this kid who is like a Bernie bro Democrat, like he's very on the liberal side. And but he's down in Texas, and most of the kids in this thing are conservative kids.
Yeah.
So he gets in charge of, he wants to run for president, and he's kind of like in charge of his group, and he's trying to tell them, like, here are what my values are. And even though the kids tend to lean conservative, this kid introduces these kind of Bernie ideas, these kind of almost sometimes even socialist ideas to the group of kids. But because of like how they're bonding together and how they see this as their side, he kind of like gets them to commit to all of these ideals, and they are like very adamantly fighting for these Bernie ideals, even though they started the thing being like, I just want guns and freedom, you know. Instead, they're just like, you know what, let's tax the rich and, you know, and give everyone free college. And they start to like they just completely commit to it. And it's fascinating to watch because it happens in the course of a day, one day for these kids. Also, I really am recommending it. It's like a delightful documentary. It gives you all sorts of hope for the future. I think we rented it for $2 on Prime. I'm pretty sure. Boise State it's called. It's where like Bill Clinton went there and was president. Cory Booker went there and was president. It's like got a big reputation. Mallory, what were you saying? Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry, I should have gone to you first. All right, let's look at how some of these ideas play out in Gatsby. We're going to really focus on that first part today, which is about hard work and how we value different kinds of work. So go to chapter 2, this is page 23. And pull out your Gatsby books. I always talk for longer than I want to. I get caught up in your ideas and my own, quite honestly.
Yeah.
It's not always a bad thing.
It was supposed to be 5, right?
Yeah.
23.
Kick all the adults out and make it kids only in Rhode Island.
Oh my gosh, you
Kids in Rhode Island?
No, like Rhode Island, right? We kick all the adults out and make it so you have to be under 18.
And now it's Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, it's a small state, and we're not going to know much, but like.
Except for a lot of kids, probably.
If you did something like that, there would be an aristocracy. There's enough
You
of
guys
it.
have to take lit next year so we can talk about this with Lord of the Flies.
Well,
It's
it's just take
fascinating.
money with me
I don't want to
this
read
year.
what's next year. Not like reading stuff.
Oh, all right. So this is them. We've already experienced what things are like at Daisy's house. And now Tom is taking Nick into New York to meet his mistress with a pit stop to pick her up in what's called the Valley of Ashes. So we're just going to read kind of how this is represented here. It says, about halfway between West Egg and New York, the motor road hastily joins the railroad and runs beside it for a quarter of a mile so as to shrink away from a certain desolate area of land. This is a valley of ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the forms of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and finally with a transcendent effort of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. Occasionally, a line of gray cars crawls along an invisible track, gives out a ghastly creak, and comes to rest, and immediately the ash-gray men swarm up with leaden spades and stir up an impenetrable cloud, which screens their obscure operations from your sight. So this is a place of business, a certain kind of business and labor. What is going on in this area, like economically? Like what do you think they rely on? What do they do for a living? Luke? Yeah, it's like a factory area, right? The reason that it's covered in ashes is because of all the pollution. And actually in New York in the 20s, that was the case. The pollution was so intense that it would look like fog, you know, but you'd be walking through just nasty air. So here it's called the Valley of Ashes, and we get this kind of view of the men. It says they men, you have to take a transcendent effort to see them. And then they are men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. So what does that tell us about the level of respect that Nick has towards the people who live in the Valley of Ashes? Little to no respect. Okay. Yeah, he seems to feel some pity for them. Would you say it's pity, sympathy, or empathy? Do you think empathy is like the one where you're like feeling their emotions? Not empathy. Okay.
I don't even want to say it's sympathy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he doesn't truly feel bad for them. If anything, he's just grateful that he's not.
That's a great way of putting that. That doesn't really count as pity, does it? A kind of like feeling kind of not even lucky, just like, I'm glad I'm not you.
Yeah, it's not like he's here like saying, oh, I want to help you.
Yeah.
That's why I say what pity or sympathy is.
Uh-huh.
He's here just like, well, it sucks to be you.
Yeah, right. And why does it suck to be them? They move dimly and already crumbling through powdery air. What does that tell us about these men's lives as laborers?
They're not gonna live
What
very
life?
long.
They what?
They're not gonna live very long.
That's one thing, right? We imagine them breathing in this air, and we know they're going to have a short life expectancy just because of their living circumstances. Sam?
I feel a lot of that was also less about the physical appearance, more about like what they're feeling.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us can feel kind of empathy towards them now. When we were putting quarantine, I'm sure many people see us the same way. Where we felt like we weren't going to get to the next day because everything's just moving so slowly. Nothing's going right.
Yeah.
It's just the same. It's none.
Yeah, so let's talk, that is an amazing connection there. Moving dimly then, let's talk about what that actually means in practice. It's not moving, it's not slowly, it's dimly. Why does he use that adjective or adverb? Luke?
Maybe because like the people that live in this area and live there, like everyone when they're younger, like they have like a light in their eyes and like almost like a fire in their spirit, like they have so many ambitions. So,
Yeah.
Maybe these people, they like already realize that like their lives are basically over. There's no way to like change it from now on. They're on the go.
Okay, so it's kind of like about like a drive that you have then, this ambition. And if Gatsby has a heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, these guys have the opposite of that. They move through life dimly. There is no sensitivity to the promises of life. It doesn't feel like they think that there isn't any promise to life, maybe. Yeah, Nathan.
I think that fits it more. I was going to say that, but I also wanted to say a little side thing. It can also be seen as like physically they are covered in ashes and they have darker complexions and stuff because they're just kind of stained with, like if you've ever done art or something with charcoal and like one wipe on like your arm or something and it's just like,
Okay.
stays there.
Yeah, so skin sometimes has a glow to it. This skin has been dimmed by like just smudges all over it, the ashes of the smudging. Yeah, I like that physical definition. I really like what Sam was saying about this quarantine thing because the dimly idea to me fits really well. It's not like, for me, quarantine wasn't too bad because I'm a total introvert and I liked being alone for the most part. But this idea that you didn't know when it would end, like after the first couple of weeks, when you were just like, wait, this is going to go on for, I thought it'd be 2 weeks, honestly. And then it goes on for longer. It gives you this like extended feeling of just like stasis. Nothing is going anywhere, like Luke was talking about. And it says it makes them feel like they're already crumbling through powdery air. So they also kind of become part of their surroundings, which, so they're not like distinguishable as human from their surroundings, right? Which also feels like quarantine to me because it's like you're on your 7th episode of the Netflix show you're binging and you kind of just sink into your couch. Like what distinguishes you from what you're doing? This is all you live for. It's just the day-to-day monotony. Yeah, Sam.
I think it's because of that dim comfortness they have in themselves is the reason why then, and now, if any of us catch any kind of small excitement, so like with us, it was the election and the family was like working by it. I mean, everybody just went at it. It was like
also with BLM too, right? Like
yeah, we were in quarantine. And suddenly, this little thing happened, so we turned it into a big thing. So
Yeah, and there are things that a lot of times, if we were kind of caught up in our daily lives, we would have recognized and been like, that's terrible, and then just sort of kept going with our lives, right? But this caused people to be kind of heightened in their emotional state. I think that's really important moving forward in this book too. Okay, look here too where it says, immediately the ash gray men swarm up with leaden spades and stir up an impenetrable cloud which screens their obscure operations from your sight. Nick takes a perspective here where he's like, I'm on the your side, where I'm looking at the ash gray men, I'm not empathizing with them, they're not me, luckily, right? And here I am, and they swarm at me, and then they start working, and then they disappear again from my view because of these clouds of smoke. What does that tell us about the way we view, working people in this book?
It doesn't really matter what goes on behind the scenes. It's just in a cloud. It doesn't matter what happens out there as long as you're still fine.
Yeah, so it's like, as long as we don't have to think about the garbage men, then we're comfortable. Every once in a while, they'll come forward, we'll see them, and then they will disappear again, and we don't have to think about them anymore. Okay.
That's pretty much what I had to say. It almost seems like an out of sight, out of mind type thing. Like the second that cloud goes up and you can't see them anymore, you're not going to be thinking about them even like 2 minutes later.
Yeah.
They're just kind of gone.
Tell me about that word swarm too. And then I'll get to these. Sam?
I think it'd be related, like he could be viewing it almost as if it's like his car. Because like we're in a car and we're not thinking about anything that's going on with the engine and the axle or anything like that. But as soon as one thing happens wrong, we feel like there's these million other problems that come with it. And then we get them fixed and then they just go away again. And we don't want to do anything about it. And maybe we just do things that will temporarily fix it, but will ultimately.
Yeah.
Once you start looking at one thing, you'll always find another thing that can be fixed.
I like that. So the swarm is about this kind of compounding sense of problems that you don't want to think about. Ben, what were you going to say earlier?
It's kind of like when you don't have to see them to actually do it. It's like it can also be your mind space and stuff, because you can be just living your life and see a garbage truck, think about the garbage truck for a second, but then the next second it's down the street and it's out of your mind again. So you can kind of think of how often you remember or even appreciate them.
And how often
they were there, then they're gone.
It's like just based on how much they affect you, right? They just picked up my garbage. I don't need to think about them, because it's not a profession that people aspire to often. I want to return to that idea here. There are certain kinds of labor here that are very much rewarded and thought of highly, right? And then there are certain kinds of labor that people would prefer not to do, and yet somebody has to do them. And when somebody has to do them, then we would prefer not to think of that person. It not just their labor becomes invisible, but they become invisible by doing that kind of labor. So there's a kind of like there's a problem to valuing hard work then. Even if we do value manual labor as a kind of idea, that person becomes the manual labor, and then we can kind of put them aside a little bit. And that's a weird idea, but we'll think about that. Okay, and then this is where Mr. Wilson lives. This is where Myrtle, his wife, lives. I love the description of Myrtle. Can we just look at that description on page 25? It sounds so very modern because of, thick. So it says, then I heard footsteps on the stairs. This is at the bottom of the page. And in a moment, the thickish figure of a woman blocked out the light from the office door. She was in the middle 30s and faintly stout, but she carried her surplus flesh sensuously, as some women can. Her face, above a spotted dress of dark blue crepe de chine, contained no facet or gleam of beauty, but there was an immediately perceptible vitality about her, as if the nerves of her body were continually smoldering. So it's not that she's fat thick, she's like thick is what he's saying here, right? Like he's saying her surplus flesh is like creating a kind of hourglass here. Like it's the good kind of surplus, says Nick. And yet not beautiful at all. And that's very important for him to point out. She's not beautiful. She just has a vitality and she's continually smoldering. So how's he judging this Myrtle lady? I mean, would you want to be described as he just described Myrtle?
No.
Why not?
If it uses the words surplus and flesh, I will take a pass.
But what if it's surplus flesh sensuously?
That still doesn't sound good.
Oh, okay.
There's a difference in error and talking.
Yeah.
I mean, you just have to translate it.
So yes, that's important. The flapper ideal of a flapper girl in the 20s was svelte, as thin as can be. Hopefully just a, plank. Yeah. It's kind of a precursor to like the 60s models, like with Twiggy, that were like so thin that it was scary. The flapper girls, that was kind of the aesthetic for it, pale and really skinny. So she's the opposite of fashionable then. She's not fashionable. And instead she's got this sex appeal to her that he finds a little disgusting, I would say. Like he's like looking at her and he's like, yeah, she's got curves in all the right places and I don't like it.
Yeah, no, I
You know what that's like?
No, I'm like I know like what they're talking
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
all class, just turn my head and every single one.
about. And you're like, dang, and then you see him like take her mask off, you're like, what? And you're like,
Oh, see, you're being Nick. You're being judgmental the way Nick is.
I am judgmental. We're all judgmental, whether it's positive or negative judgment.
Not me. I'm one of the few honest people I know. Yeah, I mean, it's important to him to make this aesthetic judgment, though, of this working class woman. That's what I want to get at here. Is that the men are, the way he judges the men is that their labor's invisible, they're covered in ash. The way he judges the women is like, all they're good for is their body, Okay, so he's gonna get into like all the rest of this, but we gotta move on. Let me ask you this. In this book, there is a judgment. I don't want to even ask a question. I just want to tell you. The rich people, the aristocracy here, they're almost seen as coming by their money in a way that's honest and clean, right? They're wearing white clothes all the time. They're obsessed with racial purity. They're just Tom, but still by association. They have a kind of like innocence to them because they didn't have to work for their money. Gatsby, who has to work for his money, he's seen as a little bit like tacky, and part of that is because when you have to work for money, if you want a lot of it, the idea here is that it might be corrupt. Did you catch by now that Gatsby's a bootlegger? Gatsby's not getting his money by honest means. He's either in gambling stuff with Wolfenheim. We should probably talk about the anti-Semitism there, but he's like in some kind of gambling stuff there. This idea of owning drugstores, that's probably code for I'm getting alcohol into drugstores for them to sell in back rooms. So there's this idea that his working for money then comes with a kind of corruption. And then bottom on the totem pole is the Wilsons, who honestly have to work for their money. And we see this as kind of dirty and beneath us, and hopefully we don't have to think about it too much. So that's what Gatsby feels like about the book. I mean, that's what this book kind of thinks how we judge people in America based on this ideal of hard work, hard labor. But I want to know more about what you think. So I'm gonna give you a piece of paper. We gotta get into arguments. Okay, it smells like garlic, right? It's not just inside my mask.
Emmeline said she tried to join the Zoom, but
So she was like Lulz gang or whatever?
Oh, no.
Wait, I don't smell garlic. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm thinking about
Okay,
pizza
good.
and I can smell pizza.
Okay, good. I just thought I suddenly got weird breath.
Quick question.
Yes.
Do you not capitalize garlic because it's a season or a food?
This is a food.
It would have to be.
All right, you're gonna write a thesis statement. We've done a lot of these by now.
Sorry, I derailed us. Let's get back here. We're gonna write a thesis statement. The thesis statement, again, it's a claim, something that is argumentative, something that not everyone would believe, plus a reason. And the reason is, this is why I know that my claim is true. This is the reason that my claim is true, right? And the question is, what we've been talking about. What do we value more in America? Hard work or the path of least resistance? So answer that in a thesis statement. And a thesis statement can have all kinds of complexity. You know, we value hard work in theory, but not in practice. You know, it can have room for gray area.
Yeah, that was her.
Well, tell her I'm sorry, but I've had people, and I think she was in the group last time that got hacked, so I couldn't let her in.
She had an improv thing, and so her name was weird.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, I recorded it, so she'll have to watch the recording. All right, you're writing your thesis. Okay, now I know people are still writing the thesis, but I want to show you mine as an example. So I said the American ethos frequently centers on rhetoric about the value of hard work. So basically I'm saying America gets credibility through its rhetoric about hard work. But an unspoken hierarchy of respect for certain kinds of employment shows that we are far more impressed by those who do not have to work at all.
Yeah.
Well, I've been doing it longer, so I hope. Okay. So I want you to look at your thesis statement again. And now I want you to try to, and we've done this now a couple times, I want you to try to break it up into its logical parts. So I showed you here how I've done that. I said American ethos about the value of hard work. I'm just going to explain that. I'm going to use a lot of sources that I've read to like show how we talk about the value of hard work a lot. Then I'm going to say, but there's a disconnect between the way we talk about work and the way we treat workers. And even though they require the hardest of work, we continually undervalue jobs that are physically intense or dirty, placing people who perform this work at the bottom of an employment hierarchy. And then I say we also undervalue people who work hard and gain money too quickly. We call these people new money and think of them as tacky. So the people who supposedly are living the American dream the most, who have this kind of social mobility, we're like, oh, that's tacky. And then the people who seem to have the most respect and thus power in our country are those with inherited wealth, or such an enormous amounts of wealth that they no longer have to work. And I say this hierarchy of employment shows that our admiration of hard work might be an abstract concept meant to inspire those who do the jobs that we don't want to do. So I'm kind of going into like why we do this. So I want you, it doesn't have to be as intense as this, but I want you to try and break up your thesis statement now into parts.
And the way that you kind of do this, and this is repeat, but I just want to make this clear, is you kind of look about, what did I say in my thesis first that I need to prove? And the first thing I did was I dropped this term American ethos. So I know that's the first thing I need to prove. And you kind of go through each little part so that you're not trying to prove your entire thesis in every single paragraph. You just have a small project for each paragraph that you're trying to prove. Okay, I'm gonna leave this up here like this and give you some time to start breaking this up. Now, if you find you're having trouble breaking up your thesis, sometimes that's a sign that your thesis isn't as strong as it could be. So see where you can kind of make your thesis a little more complex or nuanced so that you can have, you know, more to say in your paper. And raise your hand if you want me to come take a look. Or just call me over. We're casual in here. Okay, I know some of you are still working on your outline, but I want to show you what the next step would be. The next step will be kind of plugging examples that you can use into your argument essays. So on the AP test, you have 2 argument essays. One is called a synthesis, where you get to use sources, and one it's just up to you to rely on what they call your experience, your reading, and your observations. So it's really based on like what you know about the world. We did a really good job bringing stuff up in here. You guys brought up the space race, you brought up the election. I think we brought up Black Lives Matter, or I did. We brought up the, you know, insurrection. We brought up all sorts of stuff. You can use all of that in your argument essays. The way I like to picture this is the style of argument where you're at a dinner table and someone brings up something controversial. You're not going to be able to get online and look up sources to fully back yourself up, right? You're going to have to rely on your own reasoning and your own observations about the world in order to back up your arguments. So here, luckily, I've you know, read a lot. So I'm going to talk about Nixon's speech on hard work here. But you might talk about how your dad always talks about hard work. Nixon worked hard, actually. It was hard for him to cheat. There was a lot of
lot of parts to it. You know, you might talk about how your dad always talks about hard work. So you could bring up this idea of like, you know, it's just personal to me. Here, disconnect and the way we treat workers in a concrete way. I am going to talk about COVID and essential workers. I'm going to focus on grocery store workers in that section and how, you know, we're talking a big game about how much we need them, but they're not getting the vaccine anytime soon, you know? So I kind of am going to put that in there. And maybe down here, I'm going to talk about Mr. Wilson in The Great Gatsby. And I'm going to start plugging in these sources so that I kind of know what examples I'm going to rely on in my paragraphs. So we have no more time. We've got to clean the desk. Please hold on to this because next time we're going to start plugging in sources and we're going to start doing paragraph structure with this content. All right, Eli, we are done with class. I don't actually need you to turn in anything. Just don't lose track of the stuff you were working on for today. If you have it in the Google Doc or something. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Homework for next time is to read chapter 7 and 8. If I were you, I'd just read to the end. Once you're there, just go for it. Yeah. I bet you'll want to read to the end after you read to the end.
Time to do it.
Once you guys is clean, pick up. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Isaac.
Thanks, yeah. I'm sorry, yeah, go for it, thanks.
You put it in your mouth, it's big.
2 seconds. Is it true?
Wow. You know what's funny is I talk about bagels all the time, but I don't eat a bagel more than.
Thanks, did you have any questions after today?
Not really. Is
So-
there anything like I need?
All you should do for our class this weekend
Just read
is
it.
read Gatsby up to chapter 8. If that's not possible, because I'm sure you're bogged down with stuff, shoot me an email and let me know. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mia.
Present Christmas morning and it's just some box of bagels.
There are plain bagels too.
A box of plain bagels.
I got punched in the face yesterday.
What?
I got punched in the face on Wednesday.
Guess who punched me in the face?
Who?
A freaking mountain.
You know who punched me in the face? Are you okay?
No.
You know who punched me in the face?
I was skiing in the mountain, which is like.
Boxer.
I was afraid you guys were in like a fight club or something.
No, that would be debate.